Hi, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion on the mentor-mentee relationship in civic engagement work. I'm joined today by two panelists who started their mentor-mentee relationship many years ago and have a lot of good experience and advice to recommend to our audience about this topic. On the panel today, we have Cherie Strawn, Professor of Political Science and Director of the Ray C. Bliss Institute of Applied Politics at the University of Akron, and Kevin Lawrence II, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Saginaw Valley State University. I'm William Obrochta, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Texas Lutheran University and Director of the Professional Development for the APSA Civic Engagement section. So on today's panel, our focus is really to think about developing the mentor-mentee relationship, especially for graduate students and new faculty interested in civic engagement. And we're going to tackle this from kind of two perspectives: one as the potential mentor and the other as the potential mentee. So I wanted to start off by thinking a little bit about how y'all started your mentor-mentee relationship and describing how you first met, how this meeting then developed into some form of mentor-mentee relationship. So Cherie, I don't know if you wanted to get started.
Sure. So I was actually, I spent 15 years of my career at Central Michigan University in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and Kevin was one of my students. So Kevin was in our master's program, and Kevin also has a background in K through 12 education and was transitioning to consider pursuing a PhD. So he came to us for a master's degree. And I think that shared interest in education, and civic engagement work was the initial trigger. And I was trying to weave as much of that into my courses and special topics and graduate classes that I taught. And so that just clicked for us, that we both had that interest in, basically political socialization in campus and K through 12 settings. But then, as with all of my students, like, we actually sent Kevin away and he finished his master's degree and pursued his PhD at Wayne State because that was better for him. Right. And so for me, mentoring is being in relationship and talking to your students or people that you're going to mentor so that you know what they're interested in, what's best for them. It would have been great to keep Kevin as a grad assistant and get more work out of him because he's really good, but it was better for him to leave us. And so, then I just try to keep in touch with people. And out of pure selfishness, we had, well, maybe not pure selfishness, but a lot of selfishness. We just had a lot of shared interests, had good conversations. As someone who I think is an absolute bonus, a net positive impact to have someone like Kevin in the discipline of political science. And I wanted him to stay and be successful and to go to conferences with me and, be part of my professional network. So it's easy to keep in touch with people when you feel that way about them.
Yeah, I don't know how much I can add. Other than Cherie was one of the telltale signs of a great mentor is somebody who will tell you, you need to leave here, you need to go on to another pasture. It was probably one of the best conversations that I've ever had in my professional and academic career, of somebody sitting me down and telling me that, which made Cherie stand out for sure. And we did stay in contact. Cherie was really instrumental during my PhD years as well. I reaching out for advice, seeing her at conferences. That advice has just been instrumental to my professional growth and my professional career, and being able to talk to somebody. And Cherie was always available for that, and so it's been. Yeah, I'm really happy that I went to Central for that 1 year. That was really great. And it would have been great to stay and work as a grad assistant, but instead we just became, co-authors. So, is how it developed. So, but yes, so it was a really great, fortunate meeting. And it's been continuing to be a great mentee relationship since.
So you mentioned, Kevin, that it was kind of fortune that the first meeting occurred. And I want to touch on two things, which is one, like, was there intentionality? Cherie, you mentioned kind of seeing that Kevin had similar research interests and then reaching out. So maybe that was intentionality that happened there. And then second, It is relatively straightforward to keep in touch with various people throughout the discipline, but some graduate students are reluctant or hesitant or might not know strategies for maintaining and strengthening relationships, especially if it's someone that you're not seeing all the time. And so I wondered if you had any thoughts about one, kind of that initial approach, and then second, being intentional about maintaining that relationship and what kind of strategies are from both perspectives. And maybe Cherie, you mentioned, seeking Kevin out initially, so maybe you could start with this.
Sure. He was a student in my class, asked for, I think some of it came from Kevin. It's hard to remember all the details because it's been a while, but I think he asked for readings. When I assigned things about civic engagement or civic education work, had clearly read very thoroughly and had an interest in it, had ideas for research projects. So some of it was just Kevin making it clear that we shared an interest by his behavior that probably rose to my attention. I try to be available to all my grad students, right, or junior colleagues, but certainly when they share interests with you, it catches your attention because those conversations are more engaging just because you're more interested in them. I'm happy to give advice to anyone, but I'm not going to be the best for someone in comparative work, for example, because I might not know those networks or publication strategies as well. So I think a lot of it was just Kevin being a good student, being engaged in class, coming to me after class and having conversations.
I will agree. I think that from the student perspective, it is to, if a professor makes themselves available and is willing to have those conversations in and outside of the classroom, then you pursue those. Cherie's right. I was really interested in that first class that I took with her, a lot of that civic engagement stuff, and and being willing, once you express interest, and then like, here's a slew of other books, and come talk to me about it, and everything is really helpful there. I think therefore then that's also like staying in contact, having that communication, and not just when you're a student, but also when you leave and go on to another program, or you leave the program, you graduate. You need to keep those lines of communication open, and it's really easy to say that it's easy to stay in contact. You can call them up, you can send an email, you can see them at a conference, but that is so passive that it does not allow for growth in that relationship to develop. And so there needs to be a little bit more proactiveness with that. And it's a two-way street. I will say, I stayed in contact with Cherie, but Cherie also stayed in contact too and showed interest, like, how are things going, and it wasn't just always, how can I help you? It was also like, how are you doing? Because, she's been through a PhD program, she knows, and so forth. So it's like those kind of check-ins that really, shows that, investment, if you will.
That makes a lot of sense. And, thinking about not only selecting the mentor or you as a mentee, thinking about possible mentors that kind of fit your area of research expertise, but also something that I found very important when selecting mentors in graduate school was someone who supported my broader interests in the discipline toward more teaching focused jobs or toward this type of field work, et cetera. And that resulted in picking a selection of mentors that aligned okay with my research interests, but then also were supportive on the other dimensions of the position. And that's kind of the advice I give to students a lot, which is it's great to have that absolute alignment, but then do you want to go do or follow that advice that the mentor is giving you? And some people that's a good fit, and some people it isn't as good of a fit as they wanted it to be. So,
and I think that sometimes you need to keep in mind that you need to have more than one mentor. You should have a network, right? There are people who will give you great advice about your publishing. They may not be the best about career advice in terms of your teaching or your service commitments or other things that you might struggle with. It might be important to find someone who aligns. I mentor a lot of women, right? Who have maybe struggled with incidents that they don't quite know how to handle that happen because they're women, whose research doesn't align with mine. So I think it's important to have a network of people who will support you across all the things that you're trying to do in your career, and that you might not find that in one person.
Absolutely. So speaking of kind of thinkings about civic engagement mentorship specifically, we've talked about this a little bit in terms of your shared interests, but there are a bunch of panels, of course, on mentoring relationships, but I wanted to think specifically about what are considerations from the faculty perspective and the mentee perspective about mentorship specifically related to civic engagement work. And Cherie, I wanted to start with you and get your perspective about thinking about framing that mentorship relationship for graduate students or junior faculty. And then Kevin, like, how did you go about thinking about civic engagement work with mentorship?
So one of the things I make sure that I have a serious conversation. I've been part of, I've been doing civic engagement work since I went to Central, especially after I got tenure. And one of the things that we've worked really hard to do, sort of that cohort of people who were doing civic engagement work around the same time, 20 years, is to try to make sure that civic engagement is perceived as a serious place to publish and do research, because we all know it's really hard to do this work unless you can think about ways to, it's such a service commitment, it's such a time commitment. Anytime you're doing applied work like this, your university will say yes all day long to let you do as much service that you are passionate about, and they'll let you work 80, 90 hours a week. And then they might not tenure you. So we've worked really hard. So I'm always encouraging people, even if this is, maybe you're a comparativist, but you do civic engagement work as your service, find ways to publish in Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, find ways to publish the pedagogy research, do classroom pre-posts, do assessment work on your, on your campus-wide initiatives, because this is still the coin of the realm in political science, and how your colleagues, even at a teaching institution like Central, I had a 3-3 load, even at that, a teaching focused regional public, my colleagues who were going to tenure me and review my case cared more about what I was publishing than that I was doing that kind of service. And so we've tried really hard over the past couple of decades to ensure that there are publication outlets, and to ensure that we give advice to people and mentor people about how to publish this stuff. But then I also say you need to have a serious conversation. Not everyone will count pedagogy research as research. They will count it as a commitment to teaching and put it in that box when you go up for tenure. And so I always make sure to have a serious conversation with whomever, to talk to who's going to put your case forward. What are your colleagues in your department think? Do you have bylaws, right? That, like at Central, I had bylaws that said any peer-reviewed publication counts as a category 1. So Journal of Political Science Education or something that was peer-reviewed, they couldn't take it away from me, even though it was pedagogy. Do you have that kind of guarantee that that's how your work is going to be counted? And if not, you need to have serious conversations, because it's different, right? At Central, I had the luxury of making sure that pedagogy work counted toward research. And so I could expand it and make it a bigger part of my profile. Other people don't have that luxury, right? And it's going to all get counted as, well, a publication about teaching counts to say that you are a better teacher, or that you're taking teaching very seriously, but it might not be what you need to do to build your tenure case. And so just having those conversations, I think it's unfortunate. I think we are seeing a sea change right now in the discipline to revalue that commitment to applied civic engagement work with our students and on our campuses. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it depends on the culture of your department and your dean. And so I would just say, have those conversations. And I don't ever want to discourage anyone from doing this work, because it's the thing that made me whole. I'm not sure I would still be in the discipline if I couldn't, do something normative about preserving democracy. It's the thing that, makes the rest of my work make sense. but I also want to keep people in the discipline. So I think they have to have those serious, very serious conversations.
So Kevin, what would you say are, when you were engaging in this mentoring relationship with Cherie, what were areas where talking about mentorship related to civic engagement was most important or helpful to you? You know, Cherie mentioned one in terms of tenure promotion recognition, but are there other areas that were where civic engagement mentorship was really critical for you?
I have three. In addition to the professional conversation about getting this to count for tenure and promotion, which, you know, just to underscore that very briefly, it's really, really important, especially when I was on the job market of, you know, what positions I was applying for, of asking those kinds of questions or looking for, do they support it from an institutional perspective? What about your department and so forth? That's really, really important. The other three, though, is Cherie was great in getting me in contact with other established scholars in the field. And that's not just, you know, the leading scholars, but scholars from across the bandwidth of the discipline of those who are doing more applied work, those who are doing more theoretical, and everybody in between. Being able to have those established connections, you know, broadens your professional network and also allows you to have those diverse perspectives that Cherie mentioned earlier too. For instance, Cherie was really good at one saying, I don't know, you know, I don't necessarily have a good answer, but I know somebody who does, you know, or might have another perspective. Second is connections with resources. Part of this is that as you're a graduate student, you're learning about what data is available out there, what data could be, you know, what's a dream and so forth, but also being able to, as you transition to that junior scholar role, when you're doing your own research, of being able to rely on your mentors to kind of, you know, I don't know how to operationalize this, or is there some secondary data, or can you help me with this? So having connections to those resources. Which frankly just comes from people who have been there, who have the wisdom and the connections. And then the third one has been just brainstorming, frankly. When I have an idea, Cherie is often, if not the first, right up there of somebody who I call, I message and just say like, hey, we're thinking about this. And, you know, it's just an opportunity to kind of, you know, figure out what best practices, what would be a good approach. Am I off, you know, off my rocker, what have you? And those sessions are really invaluable, not just in terms of developing a good project, but also in terms of, you know, connecting you to resources, possibly finding other co-authors or collaborators and so forth. And I think all of that is really, really helpful in terms of, as Cherie has mentioned, there's been kind of a renaissance, and perhaps the discipline, I hope, is taking more of an active interest and role in this, which means it's even more, you know, that's great on the one hand, but that also means that it's important for us to cultivate that further.
I appreciate, Kevin, your three well-defined examples to go with Cherie's recognition and incentives example. And I wondered if we could push that a little further and think about any, what y'all would call, I don't know, key moments in your mentor. So we got a list of 4 things right here, but are there specific examples where it's like, okay, this invitation really led to XYZ happening? You know, in my career, I'm thinking about, I went to a TLC and it was someone who, the only person who volunteered to write the little track summary.
Yeah.
And the result of that is that Julia Helwig and I started really getting to know each other, and she has then consistently sent me this XYZ opportunity, and now we're working on this activity book for an intro to American politics OpenStax text. And so, you know, that was just like, I was there, and yes, I took a little bit of initiative by saying, I'm the only one in this room of 20 people that is willing to do this. But then she saw that and took some initiative back. So I wondered, I'm only giving that example because it was an example of, hey, this one thing led to a bunch of other resources and relationships. So I wondered if, Cherie, first, you had any thoughts? I guess it'd be interesting to compare, right? Any specific times where you were like, hey, this what really is an event that changed our mentor-mentee relationship. And then Kevin, I'll ask you about, again, specific examples.
It's hard for me to think of one specific incident. So Kevin might have a better memory of that. But I will say, like, in my own career, and what I tell people is, go to TLC. Because the workshop format allows you time to have conversations with established people so that, maybe you don't have this faculty member, sort of serendipity that Kevin and I had, who's interested in civic engagement work. You will find those people on the tracks at the TLC, right, who are doing civic engagement. And if you express this much interest, we will be all over you. Right? Someone like Julia, someone like Dan Mallinson, someone will find you and bring you in and encourage you to continue to do that work because we care about it. And I think that's true of any business section or any small conference where people care passionately. It's not just civic engagement work, right? It's the business meetings and the places where people gather because they care a lot about what they're publishing or what their heavy service commitments are. And so I always tell any younger junior colleague or any graduate student that's interested or seeking mentorship from me, those are my points of advice: is if it's civic engagement or pedagogy work, go to TLC because that's where I built my network, but also go to the section meetings. The section meetings are why do sections get founded? Because people have a new area of research interest or a new area of teaching interest, and they aren't having that need met somewhere else in the discipline, or there's not a journal and they want to launch a journal. So the people who cared enough about that topic to do the work, to get the petition signed and establish a section, are going to consistently show up. And like you said, there'll be 20 people in the room. And it's even if I'm an extrovert, so it wasn't that hard for me to do that. Show up on my own and go to section meetings and talk to people. I cited your article. I like your research. I read your book. It had this impact on me. Or I just saw you present on a panel. Great paper. I'm looking forward to reading it. Those are the places where I would strongly encourage. So maybe I gave Kevin that advice too. I don't know. Probably.
You did, yeah. I think I still remember, that one about go to the business meetings, and I've always tried that every conference. Always just go and, be a fly on the wall and then eventually be a talking fly. So I think though that for a concrete example I'll give a very recent one that's kind of a culmination of this of years of this mentoring that's come to fruition has been in my current role. I just recently took over being the Cards Vote Civic Engagement Coordinator for SVSU. And that was simply because of, everything that I've learned from Cherie, I've learned through this partnership, this mentoringship, and have developed through my academic career has culminated now when there was an opening here of being able to show to my provost that, I don't just want to do this, I also know how to do it. I know the literature, I know how to do it applied and so forth. And look, I have a network that I can rely on too, that can put, SVSU's efforts, just enrich them. And it was mentioned, why my provost was really supportive of it. I will also say too that my time here at SVSU and my evals on the way to tenure have been very supportive of saying there's a synergy in your work across your three areas in terms of engagement. Technically my PhD is in public law, but I kind of, thread that into civic engagement and have turned to that work mainly because the Republic needs it right now. But my my faculty colleagues have recognized that, in their evaluations to say that that's really, really good. And so, and I give Cherie a lot of credit for that, that I was able to do it because all those painstaking, efforts to make sure you have those conversations, to make sure they're in the bylaws, to make sure that you're, you connect it back to institutional objectives and so forth, all of that paid off. And it does, I'm living proof of that, which has been really, really great to see that, so I've been fortunate in that respect, that I haven't faced as much, I don't know what the right term is, pushback, if you will. And perhaps I'm at an institution that does value this. Of course, they're very much so valuing it from the service perspective, but they are willing to count the publications as well.
So I want to get, I don't know, like a lightning list. We've mentioned some things already in terms of what getting involved means. and ways kind of to approach getting involved. Attending TLC, attending smaller regional or specialized conferences, going to business meetings, reading papers, coming up to somebody at a networking event and talking to them about their work. What are other getting involved steps that you would recommend, Cherie and then Kevin, for becoming more engaged with civic engagement work?
So when you go to those section meetings, there will always be roles that no one else is eager to step up and fill. And I think it's naivety that we think the only thing that matters is our publications, right? Like we're sort of socialized in grad school that all that matters is your publications. Your network will help you get those publications and will keep you happy and content, and supported in your career. So when you're at those section meetings, after you've been there, a year or two, I transitioned. I started in political communication, and I had a job in a communication department. And then after a couple years, decided for a whole host of reasons that I needed to transition back to political science. But my network had atrophied, and my mentor was no longer coming to conferences from my PhD program. I just showed up at section meetings where I was interested in publishing or was doing the reading, and keeping up. And I said, after 2 or 3 years, they're going to know who I am, right? It may be painful the first couple of meetings to sit there by myself, but I'm going to make sure that people know who I am. And part of the way of doing that is to volunteer. I'll write a piece for the newsletter. I'll edit the newsletter. I'll be on an awards committee. I'll evaluate papers. I'll be a discussant, and you step forward and put yourself forward after people have gotten to know you a little bit. And do the work and do it well. And it just layers on top of each other, and your network just starts to expand exponentially. So the example, William, that you gave, right, with Julia is exactly what I'm talking about, right? You stepped forward and said, I'll help write that track for TLC. And no one else did. And then that resulted in Julia knowing that you're a person who will see things through and valuing the work, but also having a commitment to seeing things through. And the next time she's looking for someone to work with, if someone to volunteer for a role, you'll be in the list of people that she thinks of. So just volunteer to do things.
Kevin, anything to add to that?
Sure. On a more micro level, of your own campus where your first faculty job or whatever, very similar to, the advice that we've been saying too, do that on your own campus, because there are other people, maybe not necessarily in your department, but across an allied disciplines who probably are doing similar work and would be very interested. And there's strength in numbers, if you will. And so, for instance, of restarting this, Cards Vote Civic Engagement Coalition on SVSU, it's been really helpful then of reaching out to members of other departments who I know are doing this work, have been expressed interest, and being able to rely on them for, of restarting that program. And plus it gives you other opportunities, to do, future scholarship work, but also applied work and relying on them. So I would also say, reach out and engage in your campus too, and find similar minded people. So
we're about out of time, and I want to kind of wrap up this session. And I think the main takeaway that I saw from hearing y'all talk about y'all's relationship with one another was that initially there was a little bit of intentionality on both individuals' part. And that then resulted in, as Cherie was just describing, trying to be more intentional about developing the relationship over time and seeking out opportunities, and then thinking about when someone says, oh, you should get involved, like actually taking that as an invitation and taking the next step in getting involved. And that might be uncomfortable initially, or you might feel, well, am I really qualified to do X, Y, Z? But most of the time, there are not a lot of other people stepping up and saying, I want to do this. And by you stepping up, maybe that role is a good fit, maybe it's not, but at least it's clear that, hey, I'm interested in getting started with this work. I'm interested in working with you. I'm interested in this project. And that can develop into these longer lasting relationships, as Kevin was mentioning, both on campus, with who's eventually going to tenure and promote you, right? And then off campus, if you are then working more broadly or seeking positions in other places. So I think that's a good takeaway for especially graduate students and new faculty who might be nervous about setting up and getting started with those relationships. And I want to thank both of y'all for coming on the panel and contributing your comments and expertise today. There's going to be another panel that follows up on this one that talks specifically about mentoring undergraduate students and graduate students interested in non-academic jobs. So I invite everybody that's watching this panel today to be on the lookout for that additional panel. And thanks so much to our panelists for this great discussion.